What's up? Have you ever thought to yourself, what if I had just done, something besides the thing that I actually did do? You know, what if I chose something for me rather than, listen to other people and their guilt trips? The question is, do our choices really matter? Well, today you're in luck. This is the Existential Stoic podcast, and that is our topic. I'm Danny here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny.
So have you ever thought about so I existentialists think about choice all the time, and talk about it constantly. You hear about dread, anxiety, right? Facing those choices that define us and like not knowing or being afraid of which ones the anxiety, right? Of like choosing right. Because you're choosing yourself. They really put a lot of emphasis on choice as defining us. Do you really think it does? I mean, do you think that way? I mean, I don't know.
It's a tricky one because it presupposes that we actually have the agency of choice,
It does. Yeah, it does lean on that a lot.
right? So, okay, assuming that we do have the agency of choice, then it's difficult because, some things is like very clear, yes or no. Other things is very nebulous and you have no idea. And it's just like, maybe, maybe not, maybe I won't do anything. And like, even if you don't choose yes or no, that's still making a choice because then you're not moving forward. So it's like, I tend to think that choices are important, but at the same time, I also think that very few choices are uh, un are irreversible. There are certain ones, like suicide,
Yeah.
totally irreversible. But most other choices are reversible to some degree.
Well, let's say it this way then, because I think just saying choice broadly, yeah, they think all choices affect who we are, right, and who we become. But clearly, like some are more important than others. I think Kierkegaard said, he said, like when you're thinking about like that fork in the road, like a big philosophical, spiritual, ethical choice, right? Those are going to be really self-defining if you choose correctly. If you put yourself into that choice and don't like let others choose for you, stuff like that. Um, Obviously there's gonna be some choices that are like more mundane, like what I wear today, I can obviously go change. It's not a big deal. That kind of stuff, but it still does say something about you, right? So in some sense, every choice from their perspective is saying something to the world about who we are and to ourselves. And we're making ourselves through those choices. Yeah, it's interesting because like when you read the text, like you can kind of get in that headspace of wow, like they are like choices really do define us so much time we make choices all the time that we do reverse. And I wonder, like, if we were more aligned with who we are, living authentically, would we ever reverse our choices, And
Mm.
is maybe that what we're doing wrong?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like I look at it as, some choices are just like a given. There are certain things that are like a very clear yes and a very clear no. And that is almost like it's like a freebie. You don't even need to decide. You already
I
know.
think that's when you like know that's when you know you're like when yourself, like who you are is aligned with what you know exactly what you're doing, right?
Hmm.
Or like that gut feeling where like you just
Yeah.
it, if and I think those are the best choices where it doesn't even feel like a choice almost, it feels right.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that's what I think they talk about with like the authentic choice should feel like that. It should, but they're rare for most people.
Well, so then the other thing is the choices that don't have a clear one. Sometimes I look at that as almost a test of endurance or patience. Like, how long can I sit in that not knowing? Because I oftentimes I get there and it's super frustrating to be in that spot where you like have to make a choice, where you at least think you have to make a choice, but like there's no clear winner. And like, Ben Franklin would talk about making lists and crossing things out, whichever one's long.
Pros and
But it's just
cons.
like if it's not a clear winner, like if it's not a clear yes, then it's a no. And if it's not a clear no, then it's a yes, or maybe. But it's like maybe at those points, you're not supposed to make a choice. Maybe you're just supposed to sit there until whatever naturally unveils
We do
itself.
forget that not choosing is a choice. I mean, you can also choose not to choose effectively, right? And basically say, well, this choice is not important to me or whatever, right? So I
Hmm.
think that there is that side of it. It's really weird though, because like I do, you know, when you think about like ourselves, like what are we trying to make ourselves into anything? Because I do think about this a lot too, because the existential is like part of this choosing is like that self-making, Ortega called it like a life project. So like you have an idea of who you want to be, and like that's the project you're trying to realize. And so you're constantly, but you can change the project obviously, but you're trying to constantly realize this like self in the world. And I do want to know a lot too, because I wonder how many people are actually conscious of like who they're trying to become. In other words, like maybe we're like, are we not giving enough thought to the choices that we're making long term into who we're trying to be in the world
Mm.
and the values we sort of adhere to or believe in, that kind of stuff. I wonder if like most people don't think about this stuff and maybe aren't, you know, is that
It's
hindering them greatly?
it's a good point because there's always like the short term and the long term and like the small picture and the big picture type of thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get caught up in the small picture. And I noticed for me specifically, like this was when I was younger, I didn't have much of this like big picture type of mentality. And
Yeah, no.
so like it was a lot more difficult, but like just the concept of like taking action. Because when I was younger, there were things that I wanted, but I was like, I just don't know how to get them. Like if just somebody would give me an opportunity, like then
Oh
I could
yeah,
do
it seems like so
yeah,
far out of reach. Yeah.
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 And then like eventually I just started taking action and it was like, oh, now if I want anything, I just need to start taking action consistently. And eventually I'll get there or close or somewhere. Yeah.
But see, that's an important lesson. I don't think a lot of people realize that though, right? That you
Hmm.
can, and that action taking is that choice, right? It's like that if I want this, I just have to do it. It's
Hmm.
funny because the reason why I was thinking of this was partially because like I was thinking back to when I was younger and like all these choices I made that really weren't choices. They were just like informed by norms and obligations, or my sense of the obligations, whatever as they're presented, pressures, stuff like that. And I was thinking about like that in comparison to now where, I feel like so many more of my choices are like I'm actively making, right, for myself. And it's such a different way of thinking about like your day to day and also your planning and long-term goals and your expectations, all of that. And it's much better, and I think
Hmm.
it's funny because I don't think a lot of people get there. How many people have you ran into like that are in their our age in a job they hate, but unwilling to try anything else because of the fear of the fear of that social world that they're in, losing that job, losing their position, losing everything falling apart.
Yeah, because it's scary. Because the more skin you have in the game, the more you're afraid of losing it. I think that's one of the biggest things that people don't understand about money is like everybody wants to be rich, but once you get rich, then you're just scared of losing it all. Like every rich person I've met has just been terrified of losing it. And yeah.
Even that money, just the security, right? I mean, even if you hate your job, there's still that security of knowing that you have the job. You know what to expect when you go in. Something new, scary, because even if it was better, it's still new. You have to learn, it's like you're starting in some sense over, right? It's hard. And I think it's funny because we don't give ourselves as much credit for what we can do in the world, I think. What we
Hmm.
can achieve, what we can accomplish if we, are active making choices for ourselves.
Here's the other thing. We are really bad at predicting the future.
Oh yeah,
Really
yeah,
bad.
pretty terrible.
And so, but that's like our model for determining choices. We like pretend that we'll know what'll happen in the future when we do this choice, and we pretend we'll know what happened in the future when we choose that choice. And then that can oftentimes make us make our choices, but it's completely wrong information.
Yeah, I don't usually think about it's funny, I try not to think too much about like what I think the consequences will be. I try to think more about like like does this align with my values and what
Mhm.
I want? And
That's
hopefully the consequences will come about. Obviously I think about them and I want them, but like I don't trying to emphasize that because I figure, even like that idea of like, would I regret this if I didn't try it? Then it's worth
Mhm.
trying because then even if it fails, if it succeeds, great, awesome. Then you like win in both sides, right? But even if it fails, at least I did it and I'll learn something. Then I might be able to do it again differently. There might be a different way of doing something.
Mhm.
Especially thinking of like say like changing careers or something, right? Like I might try something, maybe that doesn't work, but then that opens up opportunities because when I proved to myself I could do it, A, and B, maybe it was a failure, but it wasn't like a total flop. It was just that I need to course correct or change some things. You never
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, that's that's a good point because there's I've heard it said that like, the econ or the actual getting of your goal isn't the important thing. It's who you become in the achievement of that goal. And that's what you were talking about there is like, is this part of my values? Is this person that I want to become, as opposed to like, will I get that goal or not? Because that's like out of your control.
Yeah, you never know. You can't like be certain that you're going to get something, especially because most everything we do depends on a ton of external factors that are out of our control. It's like particularly other people.
Yeah.
I mean,
So so let's go back to the whole like concept of, do you even have choice? So
okay.
I think it's kind of interesting because there's no way to prove one way or another that we actually have choice. But like, if if we didn't have choice, then this whole argument is null anyways, right?
I don't know though, because Nietzsche takes a fatalist approach. So he doesn't think we actually have free will, but he still actually argues for choice, which I know sounds very
Mm.
contradictory and confusing.
Yeah,
I know. It
how does
sounds,
that work?
I know. It sounds very hard to
Mhm.
grasp. I don't know how much time we have. No, it's
Yeah.
in the short end of it. So it is many philosophers in ethics, von Frozen was more recent. There's a view of compatibilism, it's called. Ethicists who think free will or choice is compatible with determinism. I'll give you von Frozen's idea because it's easier to explain quickly. Think of it this way. Like he says, imagine if you had a person and you put a chip in their head that they're unaware of, like an electrode chip, so that when a choice comes up between A and B, if they try to choose A, they will choose B. That chip will activate. Okay,
Hmm.
so if they try to choose A, chip will activate, they choose B. So they don't have a choice.
Hmm.
But they're faced with this A and B and they choose B. So the choice that the chip doesn't activate, they've chosen B, but they didn't have a choice,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That's his I think a very clear, good sort of thought experiment for how he tries to argue that compatibilism, right? Is that you don't know, in a sense, it's like you don't know that it's determined. So to you, it still is a choice, right? And if you choose that thing, it still is a free choice, even though you would have chosen it otherwise, doesn't matter, or you wouldn't
Hmm.
be forced to choose it otherwise, right?
Yeah.
And Nietzsche is sort of similar to that. I don't want to put him too much, but it's more like for him, being authentic is living sort of in line with our fate. And so we choose in a way that's natural to us. Those things are right for us. It's like we couldn't have done otherwise. That's how I like to think of it. And
Hmm.
that's, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. So in that sense, if we want to at least try and attempt to live a life that's meaningful to us, then I would say that our choices do tend to matter. Because
I think they
in
do, yeah.
because while we may not control the outcome of our choices, if we don't make any choices, we'll control nothing, guaranteed. But if we
Yeah.
do make choices, at least there's a chance we could have a little bit closer outcome to what we're looking for.
And I think too, like whether we have freedom or not, whether we have autonomy, I mean, everybody clearly values having that autonomy of making decisions and, being in control of their own life to some extent, right? We all like that. So whatever, whether we have it or not, that seems to be something we value. And I think the more you actively choose, the more you assert that, and the more you create a life that is your own. And I think I think with for the existentialists, one of the big fears there too that they identify is that responsibility that comes with it, right? That if I'm choosing, and that's part of that anxiety and dread, right? Is that if I'm choosing and then I make the wrong choice, there's no one to blame but me.
Mm.
Whereas if I do like what society tells me to do and my parent, with obligations, and something bad happens or I'm unhappy, at least I can blame other people, right? So it doesn't feel like there's that pressure of responsibility or accountability placed on me. And so it's
Hmm.
interesting because, like, yeah, it is. When you think about it, it's interesting about how much of our choices are also influenced by that fear of, do we really want to be solely accountable and responsible for ourselves? And,
Yeah.
then when we look back on our lives, have to say, all these things that they were because of me. It wasn't because of anybody else, and I have to live with that.
Yeah. That's a scary thing. I definitely don't want to get to be where I come to die and realize I didn't do what I was meant to, like, born to do, you know?
Yeah, I think it'll be all right. How do
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's all I
It's a
got.
complicated topic. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
complicated
it's an
topic.
interesting one. But I would say do our choices matter? I would say yes, but if it's not clear, give it some time.
I would say yes, and they only matter if you use your choice too. So, you have to
Hmm.
choose.
Is it true if you don't use it, you lose it?
Yeah, in some sense,
Is
in this
that,
case,
is that a
yes.
serious question? Yeah.
It actually is true. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, check us out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Please like, share, subscribe. It does help us out a lot. Even leave a review. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Until then, later, Andy.
Later, Danny.